Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to our monthly Dalim Tips and Tricks webinar. My name is Mike Moscato, and I'm going to do the presentation today. Hope everybody is safe and snug and ready to get ETWiSTed. We did a webinar a couple of years ago that was kind of a part one for ETWiST, and as things developed and other topics came up, we never got around to doing a part two. But we had a discussion recently with a customer, and he basically shamed us into doing a part two. One thing I'll try to do is avoid rehashing anything that was done in the first webinar. When I get to one of the next slides, there's actually a link to it if you want to go back and view it. Now, since I really can't stand going back and listening to myself talk, I kind of skim through it pretty quickly. So I'm pretty sure that I won't be repeating myself, at least not too much. We always go over this, but I think everybody on here today has gone through these before as far as figuring out how to get the GoToMeeting to scale and zoom properly on your screen. So I leave it to you to self-scale. So what are we going to do today? Down at the bottom, obviously you can't click on it or anything, but there's the link to the previous webinar if you want to go back and look at that. One of the things I am going to kind of go over again, because it's kind of important to understand some of the stuff I'm going to do today, is some of the initial device setup. And I think you'll probably hear me several times as we go through kind of comparing ETWiST and ES Connect. For those who are familiar, ES Connect is really ES working with a traditional TWiST server. ETWiST is a TWiST server, but it's the same but different. And a lot of what we're going to talk about is how things and certain tools behave differently in ETWiST. So people who are used to running TWiST in a certain way may suddenly encounter something in ETWiST that doesn't work the way you think it should. And what I'm going to concentrate on is some of the merging tools, merge XP, filter group, those kind of things. And what they do actually exhibits one of the main differences between the way the two different types of TWiST servers are architected. A couple other things. You'll see there's a specific routine that we've run across a couple times recently with customers having to do with ES notes getting lost or maintained when going through a workflow, and the other things at the bottom we may get to. The other thing to keep in mind is you're going to see me in ES a lot today as well. So, you know, you say, hey, I thought this was an ETWiST workflow. Well, ES and ETWiST are pretty much joined at the hip. So to do one without the other really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because ES does a lot of the driving in terms of telling ETWiST what to do and feeding it and receiving back from it. So let's start a looking. First thing I want to look at is what we're actually working with. This is my main ES server, and I have this configured with, it's really running with two ETWiST servers, because my ES server is an all-in-one. So as an all-in-one, I also have it licensed to run ETWiST. So you'll see these are my ETWiST workflows running on the main guy. But I also have a standalone ETWiST server. And what we're going to start with is reviewing a must for configuring a standalone ETWiST server. Now, if you've played with this before, you know that what I'm kind of looking at now is the basic device controller in ES that essentially can do your load balancing to your different ETWiST servers if you've got multiple servers. And if you see this workflow in red, you'll notice that it's set for capacity of 0 on my main ES server. I'm doing that because I want to force that workflow to use my standalone so that I can demonstrate one of the first problems a user could run into. So I'm just going to upload a file, any file, doesn't matter. And I'm going to ignore my job tickets there. And let's watch what happens when this thing processes or attempts to. And you can see already, you just drop dead. So let's try to understand why that guy died and get an idea of what we have to do with a standalone ETWiST server. I want you to concentrate on this area right here. So you'll notice that when I pushed it over, that standalone server tried to process the file, but you can see it couldn't find it. And if you look at the path it tried to follow to find it, that's the path or that ES uses to find a file. It's in this the volumes that you define in ES, specifically the data volume, is where ES parks files. Well, the ETWiST server was passed this file URL, and he says, I don't see it. I can't find that file. There's the URL it was passed. So the point I'm getting to is your ETWiST server, that's this guy, needs to be able to resolve those paths that ES is passing it. So I just mounted that path on my standalone ETWiST. So now he should be able to resolve the path, that file URL, and process the file. So I'm not going to do anything other than tell it to restart. And you can see it's running this time. It's not going to drop dead, probably. And that'll be returned to the project. So the other thing I'll mention is I'm running 2 ETWiST servers, but since one of them is part of this all-in-one, ES server, he doesn't need to have that sort of thing defined because he already knows how to get there since he's running on the same machine. So since we're talking about TWiST, let's launch the TWiST editor. You're going to see one thing here that's a little different than what you would see if you're connecting to ETWiST. Since on our VMs, we often will run TWiST and ES on the same server, you'll notice that this thing is actually detecting that I have an ETWiST server and a normal TWiST server. I don't think anyone runs that in production because you end up putting quite a bit of load on a single server to perform both tasks. It's legal to do it, but generally speaking, we don't recommend it. And so notice that that error that you see in there where it said unknown. That's that file that failed earlier, because when it showed up, ETWiST said, I don't even know what this thing is or where to find it. So it was completely unknown. What I want to go over now is how to work with variables in ETWiST and ES. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to try to make an analogy to WebLink and how normal TWiST users are probably familiar with how they work with WebLink, because this is fairly similar in ETWiST. Let's make believe that's a normal TWiST server and you wanted to have WebLink pass variables to it. What would you do? You'd go to Configure PPD, you go to the Variables tab, and you define the variables. Well, for ETWiST, you do the same thing. There's my boys, and I want to be able to define these variables when I upload my file. Now with WebLink, basically your job is done. You would go to your browser, fire up that workflow, and it'll present the variables to you, and you would just upload and go to town. But in ES, you have to take a few extra steps. So first of all, I don't even remember what the name of this workflow is, var example. In your ES workflow that you're running, and I think many of you are familiar with this. I mean, some of the stuff I'm going to go over is kind of basic, but you've got to cover all the bases here. That's the workflow. You select your step, edit variables, and you'll notice that the configure PPD variables that I created are all presented to me here, right? And now you're going to pass to it metadata values defined, in this case, in an upload job ticket. Now, one thing I want you to notice, because this is going to come into play a little later on, all of the metadata properties I'm using are all part of one common metadata set. I just made one called upvars, right? It's my upload variables. And again, we map the value of the metadata to the variable, the ETWiST workflow. And who can tell? Maybe it'll actually work. So I don't need to save anything. Let's go back to our project and let's just grab another file. Oh, that one's as good as any other. And there's my upload job ticket, right? So, you know, you just pick whatever you need to pick. Yeah, we'll tell not to trap. And maybe I want to make this PNG file, but I don't need to make a proof. Upload. As far as grabbing a process in the editor, it's really no different than what you do in normal twists. And let's do a show memories. And there are my variables, right? And, you know, from here, in terms of getting the ETWiST workflow to do what you want, it's the same game as what you're typically used to. You call the variable, and in this case, you know, for instance, the power trap is going to get bypassed because I told it not to do it. It loaded in PS check. I think I told it to keep it. If I hadn't told it to keep it, there's a set param from RE to go in there and update it. But the basic principle in terms of relating it to WebLink is the same. Define your variables in the ETWiST workflow, map them in the ES step, and then create an upload job ticket to pass the information along. One thing I want to point out, and I should have kept this guy open. Notice when we did a show memories here, it shows all these variables up top. Page order name, project ID, template, all this good stuff. And notice the category is variables. If you look down below, we also see the same stuff defined as underscore weblink underscore, right? That's the kind of stuff you used to see with weblink. And they're basically the same variables as what you see up top. So let's say you tell yourself, I wish that was a little less cluttered. I really don't need that underscore weblink stuff because just defining them as variables is fine. You go to properties and your ETWiST workflow. Choose this option, create ES vars only as twist table variables. Let's save it. And let's just reprocess that file. Now when it comes into the editor, oh, forgot to turn off notifications. There we go. Same file, but now you'll notice we have a much cleaner list of variables in here. We don't have all that underscore weblink stuff, so it's pretty, it's a bit easier to pick out what you want to work with and not have all that cluttered stuff. Now, there's other considerations that you need to think about when you're working with your ETWiST logs. Now, it's one thing to do what I just did so that what is displayed within the editor is cleaner and maybe easier to sift through. But there's also, you should also keep in mind that whenever you process files through ETWiST and they are returned to ES, it dumps a big bucket full of goodies into your database. This stuff goes into the database. Now, Dalim has recommended that if you want to try to keep your database as tidy and clean as possible, one way you can do that is to tell ETWiST not to pass all this information back in here. If it's not critical that you be able to see that all the time. What I'm going to do is I'm jumping to the admin area for that standalone ETWiST server that we're goofing with. And we stop it and go to the ETWiST tab, and I'll try to zoom that up because it's kind of hard to see. You notice this option here, transfer twist logs to ES, even without errors. Let's say we don't want to dump all that stuff in. Let's turn that off. And I'll point out, I'm zooming all over the place, there's this other option up here, append the twist logs into the Tomcat log. You could do it, but again, you're going to really clutter up Tomcat if you start throwing all that stuff in there. So that's a good idea to keep that guy off. But let's see what happens now if I tell it, don't transfer twist logs. Start that again. And I don't even remember if I can get away with just doing a restart. Let's try it. There he goes again. And let's see what comes back. JDF output. Oh, actually, it's not back yet. It's still thinking about it. Yeah, there we go. If you look now, it's a lot cleaner, right? Although, you know, if you were still interested in saying, well, okay, I guess it worked, but if I still am really jonesing to get some more information about it, you know, you do have the there's a process in here, so you know that's the workflow it ran through on ETWiST. You know which server it ran through. There's the server, and you know which process ID ran. So if you really, really needed to know, you could go through the ETWiST log or the WFL server log and pick out the information. And you know, you don't have to disable this like I showed, but it does keep your database a little tidier. The other thing I'll mention is you saw me make that edit to the standalone ETWiST server. But since I have multiple ETWiST servers, I would have to make that same change to my other guy as well. Otherwise, you would suddenly see, you know, some files where you get the clean JDF out and some where it just dumps everything in. So if you want it to behave consistently from machine to machine, you have to make that edit in the admin area on all those machines. Okay. Next, I'm going to go over a method for a more efficient way to deal with moving your variables back and forth. And the reason is, when you set this kind of guy up, when you set up your ES workflow and you add all these guys in, now I only had 5 variables in there. And, you know, I'm still kind of lazy. I don't feel like having to, you know, put all of those in. But, you know, I've seen workflows where there's 10, 12, 13 of those in there. And you have to go through and enter all 13 of them there. And within your ETWiST workflow, you also have to go through and create all 13 of the variables in here. So as they say in the infomercials, there has to be a better way. So let's look at what the better way is. First, let's see if I can find the right workflow. Oh, I think it's this one. Yep. So this is really the same workflow we were looking at before with a little extra mojo under the hood. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to configure PPD. And you'll notice I only have a single entry in there. Now, I named it upvar because I just want to be consistent between what I've got in ES and what I've got in ETWiST. But your reaction might be, well, what are you doing? How's this going to work? Because you know that I want to pass 5 variables in here. So how is it I'm only going to present 1 to ES? That's a good question. So let's go and look at the ES workflow. If we look at the ETWiST step, there's my upvars variable from ETWiST. And you'll notice I'm only passing 1 metadata value. But notice how it's constructed. The other ones before you would, file bag is how you capture, upload job ticket info. There's my metadata set, but before I would have to call out each one individually, make a proof, trap it or not, whatever. But if I just put the entry null in there, what's going to happen is ES is going to pass every value from that metadata set into the ETWiST workflow. So let's see, how does this work? Let's do some of our stuff again. That. I don't really care what it does. The whole point here is what's going to show up. So here's our guy. And let's do a show memories. Right there at the bottom, that's the name of the metadata set that, or the metadata, the variable I defined in ETWiST upvars. And notice I got 1, 2, 3, 4, I think I'm missing one. These are, I think I forgot to click one, but these are the variables getting passed from ES. But what it does, it basically sticks them all into one twist variable. Well, how is that useful? How are we going to be able to use it? Well, what we have to do is we run a tickle routine, and you can see then we bust them out into individual variables within ETWiST now. So for instance, to use this guy, we would say get mem, upvars, trap, get mem, upvars, PNG, right? So what we're able to do now is have 1 entry in ETWiST, 1 entry in the ES workflow, and pass all the variables in one shot. One thing I should have mentioned in the earlier section when we were talking about logging, it's highly recommended that once you've done your debugging for workflows and you know your workflows are behaving, that you bypass show memory tools. Because if you're still passing the logs back to ES, still one of the best ways to trim them down is do not pass all this stuff from show memory. So if you bypass it, it's not going to dump all that junk into the logs every time. Obviously, if you are working with a new workflow or you're making some tweaks, you can always turn them back on, do your testing, make sure you get everything nailed down. But once you start running it in production, again, if you want to keep your database a little cleaner, bypass those guys. Now, for what I'm doing, I'm going to unbypass them because I would never follow my own advice. Okay. Now, what you just saw me do was pass everything based on file bag, upload job tickets. But of course, that requires me, every time I upload a file, right, to go in and select all that stuff. What if you prefer to define your processing stuff in your main job ticket? Now, this presumes that all your files are pretty much going to behave the same, but with this approach, you do not have to re-enter these things every time you upload a file. And if we look at this workflow, notice it's going to do the same thing, but the category is now job. So what am I telling it? I'm telling it everything defined in the job ticket related to this upvars guy. I want you to dump it and pass it for me. So if we go back to this guy, there's the job ticket. Let's see, I'm going to say none. I don't need those. Save it. Grab a random file. Again, notice I don't get an upload job ticket because I don't want one. Push it. There he is. And you can see once again, there's all my variables. And there they are, split apart. I'm not going to go through this, point by point, but this is the tickle procedure that grabs him and parses him into the separate variables. We did a tickle webinar a few months ago that might be useful, but basically we're looking for that guy, right? That upvars guy, and the rest of this basically does a split of all that and writes it into its own namespace with the TWiST workflow. We could spend, 15 minutes going over that, but we don't want to do that. One last variation on this, on the job ticket approach. Let's say you've got more info in your job ticket that you want to pass besides just this guy. Because you notice I got this other job ticket shows up with, a bunch of information that I've entered in. So let's say that you need to pass that to TWiST. Maybe it needs to, get certain information to route and process files. And I also need to pass that. Well, this is one metadata set, and this one has values in it from 2 or 3. Is there a way we could get it to pass all that in one shot? We go here. Instead of telling it just to pass the upvars guy, we're just going to say null again. So what I'm saying is pass all the metadata from job tickets from my main job ticket to the ETWiST workflow. Can't use him because he's going to use the old settings. So let's delete that guy. Yeah, let's just grab another one. Let's see what happens with this guy. Now he's going to have a big bucket full of goodies in him. There's that one job ticket, and you'll notice there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different metadata sets that he was using. There's the upvars stuff. So we just passed, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15 or 16 variables in one shot. So that routine is really a big time saver, and all of the heavy lifting really is being done by that tickle procedure that busts all that stuff apart for you. Very handy. Now, there's a routine that we run with ETWiST and with regular TWiST via ES-Connect, which is this thing called setIgnore file. Now, I think many of you who use this are used to putting it into play, but I think it's useful to demonstrate the real reason you need to do that and what happens if you forget to do it. So I'm going to get rid of this in this workflow. Let's delete them and save. Now this workflow, if I tell it to, can create 3 files. It's going to make a PNG. This is like an EPS file in the PDF. The setIgnore file thing that we had there tells ETWiST, this file and this file, don't send them back to ES. We don't want them. I'm just using a transmit to send them somewhere. And let me confirm this workflow is running. No, it's the wrong workflow. I want to do it from here. All right, we'll do it from here. I got to edit a different workflow. Come on, which one is it? That guy. Yeah. Again, he looks pretty much the same. So let's make sure the job ticket is set to create the extra files, right? Keep spots, that's good. Upload a file. Now on the surface, even when you look at this in ES, you would think that everything is copacetic. Nothing is going to really look out of order. It made the PDF. There's those 2 bonus files it wants to make, right? And those are all done. It's going to return. And this is where things might start to look a little odd to you. Here's our file, 29.pdf. If I hover over the file, notice the file name, though, shows PNG. So you might just dismiss that, maybe your eyesight's going on you. And you just decide, this file's good. And you approve it. Now, what this file is going to do is it's going to do a digital delivery, and it should park the file over here. So you are sitting here expecting to see PDF. But notice what I got instead. I got the PNG, I got the EPS file, and I got the PDF. So this is your hint as to what happens when you forget to put that setIgnore file on. Because watch, when we return from the ETWiST workflow, if we do a show context, go to our stages, look at the working file, and you'll see we actually now have 3 working files. So as far as ES is concerned, that object is now associated with these 3 different files. And when you do any sort of digital delivery, or maybe I had even forwarded it to another ETWiST workflow, it's going to send them all. So setIgnore file, whether you're in ES Connect or in ETWiST, is very important in the instances in which you create multiple files, but only want to update ES with one particular one. In this case, it's the PDF file that we want to return. Now, I kind of jumped ahead of myself because this workflow is a workflow used to demonstrate how you can pass variables back to ES out of ETWiST. If we look at, should have stayed there, do a show memories here. And we go to the variables tab. Notice these guys, him, 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 and him. Those were pushed back into ES from ETWiST. Now this is a routine that you cannot run on ES Connect. It'll only work in ETWiST. So let's see what exactly I did. There's a very specific syntax you need to use to do this. So what I was doing here is I was capturing some timings, how long it took to go through him, how long it took through him, and the output PDF tool, right? So if you want to pass back to ES, the syntax is it has to be a variable, JDF out with a capital O underscore, and that's the name of the variable. Same thing here. My trap, JDF out, trap, PDF, and I also captured the name of the workflow it ran through. If you then want to map those in ES to some metadata values, for instance, if I look at my metadata here, you'll see there's the trap time, PDF output time, normalize and pre-flight, and I had one with a workflow name. I don't remember what it called that. Oh, right here, ETWiST workflow. So that's all now metadata within ES. Now the trick here is to be able to capture those things and write them to metadata. So let's see if I can zoom on that. You capture the variables, contact get variable. And again, this is a very specific syntax. Twist underscore the name of the variable. Twist underscore the name of the variable, right? And then I just wrote those to specific metadata values that I'm screwing around with here in ES. Now, there is an alternative to this. I mean, in fact, if you're working with ES Connect, the only way to pass variables back is via the insert metadata tool in ETWiST. You would have to write your variables into the file, and then ES will extract them and write them into metadata when it comes in. And you can do that with ETWiST as well. It's really a matter of which you consider more convenient. But you within ETWiST, you have the option. You could do it either way. Okay, now we're going to get into something that really demonstrates the main difference, or one of the main differences between ETWiST and regular twist. In fact, I'm going to pop up a keynote slide to show this, because I'm going to work with a merge XP and a filter group tool here. And what you're going to see when I start doing this is ETWiST is not going to behave. It's not going to do what I want. And the reason is, and this second point is the main one. Oop, I don't want to go backwards. Oh, all the way to the end. Come on. I know ETWiST, but Keynote is a mystery. On a regular twist server, there's this one main WIFL server daemon that runs in the background. And what he does is it allows twist to track and manage all the processes as they're generated. So it's essentially aware of all the different running processes. This is important when you're running something like merge XP or filter group, because those tools have to be able to go out and find the partner files that meet the criteria that's been defined in that tool. ETWiST does not run that process. So if you, and I'm going to do this in a second, if you dump in a couple of individual files in ETWiST, they're not, the server is not aware of them. Each process is essentially like its own WIFL SH process on its own. And the only processes it will be aware of are child processes that are spawned from it. And this is why in ETWiST, the notion of grouping or group files is a very important concept to get a hold of if you start messing around with some of these tools that need to do merging and what Dalim calls a rendezvous. So let's start with Yeah, let's start with regular twist. I'm going to launch another twist editor on my machine. Let's see if everything just goes straight down the tubes. It shouldn't. So I'm connecting to regular twist on this server, right? And I got to do something extremely simple. At least I think it is. This is a real simple workflow to merge a couple pages, make a couple singles into spreads. I'm not going to go over all the logic, but it's very, very straightforward. So I'm going to pick two pages. I'm going to pick page 12 and 13. Got a user action. And action spreads ES Connect. You should see those files come in. It does the merging, it combines them, and that thing, I believe, should have returned into a private collection here, which it did. There it is. Now, I'm running the exact same workflow in ES, I mean in ETWiST. In fact, let's close this guy because we don't need him anymore. So let's push the same two files to an ETWiST version of that user action. That guy. Let's see what we get. There they are, and there they sit in merge XP, and they are not going to budge. Says he's waiting for two processes. Where's the other one? And this is basically this is the case where these processes are not aware of each other. That'll sit there forever, and they will not merge. So how do we get this thing to do what we want? Well, first, let's open up the workflow. Singles to spread, the same one we ran on the other guy. And you'll notice in ETWiST, the input files tool has a different option. There's this thing called split set of files submitted by ES. Fair enough. What's a set of files? Well, let's look at that user action that we just ran. It is action spreads. What we need to do is turn on this option called enable grouping. What enable grouping does is it will take multiple files, that guy again maybe, I'm going to send it to the same user action, and they go into ETWiST and they're recognized as one parent process. You can see that guy work. And when they get busted apart in the input files tool, ETWiST now knows how to track the processes, and it now knows how to merge them. So that's the same workflow we just ran with the exact same user action, except we turned on the grouping option. Very important. If you ever are playing in ETWiST merge XP and the things just won't merge, that's very likely the problem that you're running into. And that guy, I think, should have returned to my private collection as well. He did. So there's my ETWiST spread being returned. Now let's now look at another favorite tool that sometimes doesn't want to play nice. That's the filter group tool. Filter group, as you probably know, you use to combine and merge files. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, we're not going to go crazy here. Maybe these 6 files. And we'll send them to the workflow or the user action titled fail. So we can all probably guess what's going to happen with this guy. So what we did, we parked these guys in here. And they are just not going to merge. They're going to sit there all day. They're not going to do what we want them to do because, again, they aren't aware of each other. Although that one actually was an issue, I think, with the capacity on here, pretty sure. But the bottom line is, oh, you'll notice it finished because that thing was set up to go to a basket and download. So you might say, I don't know, it looked like it worked to me. But whenever you get one of those things like that and you abort it like that, what it really does is it gathers up all the single pages and feeds them to you. So that thing didn't do anything that was useful in any way. So it's basically the same game if you're trying to work with the filter group tool. You need to send the files as a group and be able to bust them apart with that input files tool. I'll grab 30 of them. Go to this guy. Now, one of the disadvantages of the filter group tool, the reasons why sometimes we're not crazy about it, is the number of processes it creates, because it has to have all these guys waiting and waiting and waiting, right? Now, finally, they're all going to come together and combine and merge. And in this case, download my file to me. There he is, and I got whatever it was, 30 pages worth. And just to show what we did in that workflow, filter grouper, this guy, same game. Bust it apart here in order to get filter group to work. Oh, this is a good thing to know. When you break files apart in here with the split files, it creates a big dump of variables. All of these guys. And there's some very important variables we need to know, because for filter group to work, you got to know how many files it is. So there's this variable called group size. So within, let's close some of this stuff. It's getting in our way. Come on. Here we go. So it knows how many to wait for, get mem info group size. In terms of knowing how to group them, there's this group reference guy. Him. He identifies the initial process that everything came in from. So in this way, there's no way it's going to intermingle files if you're running multiple user actions at the same time. So it knows it's only going to group the files that came in from that one busted apart group. But let's look at an interesting variation that we can do with filter group, because you saw how long it took to do those 30 files. It has to sift through all those files in meeting. And wouldn't it be nice if there was a really, really quick way to do this sort of thing? So this is 108 pages here. I'm going to select them all. I'm going to go to slightly different user action. And let's see how long it takes this one to run. Now you're going to see it didn't bust any files apart. In fact, I fed these directly into the filter group tool. And my editor just doesn't want to tell me what's going on. That's one of the fun things about the ETWiST editor. Sometimes you got to leave it and come back to it. Hopefully that log is still there. Jump back in. So that was 108 files, and it grouped them in 5 seconds. no extraneous processes created, just one merged file that went somewhere. I'm not even sure what I had that one set to do. Let's see. I think I returned it somewhere else. Let's look at the workflow. Oh, that's the one. I'm looking at the wrong one. There we go. No, actually, it took 3 seconds to do the 108 pages. There we go. And it sent them over to my laptop. There he is. 108 of those bad boys in 3 seconds. So how did we do that? You'll notice I just let that set of the group files pass through here without busting it apart. In ETWiST, the filter group tool has an option called use set of files submitted by ES and not split previously. In other words, feed me the group. And I will combine all of them. Now, what's confusing about this, at least I think it is when you click that button, it grays out all of the stuff up top. Now, that could lead you to believe that these settings are irrelevant and that all you need to do is shove that file in here and it'll combine them automatically, and that's all you got to do. That's not true. You still have to make sure that the logic that you have up here is consistent in terms of how your file name, how your file names are defined and the group size. And what you also have to remember, and I've done this a bunch of times over the last few days, after you've set that up, make sure you remember to turn that back on. Because if you don't turn that back on, it's not going to behave. So it's really a two-step process. I want to shove the whole group in here, make sure I get my house in order in terms of the file names, then click him, save it, and you can shove the entire thing in here and merge it. Now, we need to be clear on what I'm doing here. This is not the equivalent of some of the Make Digital Edition workflows we do, because what I just did is I pushed all of the existing files from this job in and combined them. The digital edition workflows we do, we typically push those into ETWiST or ETWiST and then do a file conversion and do a final merge on. So don't want to leave the impression that this is the equivalent of a digital edition workflow, but it is a very interesting feature to be aware of when you're messing with the filter groups. Okay, I think we got one last thing we really need to cover here. Now, the first thing I'll mention is what I'm going to go over here is the result of running a workflow that, to my way of thinking, is kind of a non-standard workflow. Let's just see what we're working with here. This is an instance where files are uploaded and someone reviews them and perhaps marks them up. After they release it, it then goes through ETWiST, does some processing, gets normalized, and then returns to ES. And the issue at play here is what will happen to the notes after that. So let's watch and see. Let's open this file up. Put some notes on it. That's a tree. Tree 2, and let's just do a densitometer reading somewhere. I like blue skies. That's a good place to put a note. Okay, there's my notes. Now I'm going to approve it. Again, I think this is kind of an odd workflow, but here it is. It's going through a normalizer workflow. Returns to ES. I open it, and my notes are gone. So the question is, why did my notes disappear, and how can I get them back? You have to remember when you run a file through ETWiST like that, or any ETWiST server, and return it to ES, it's actually a different file. And the way we can prove it is we go to View and say View Stages. The input file is the original file. In this case, it's the file that was marked up. You can see there's my notes, but that's not the current working file. That's the current working file. That's the file that came back from ETWiST. And since it's a new file, it's not going to show the notes because the notes are associated with that file. So the question is, but I want my notes. I want to have my notes. Okay, let's see how to get them. Let's do it again. I won't go crazy here. An arrow. Yeah, let's just put another note in here. Some stuff. And of course, I should update my workflow so this behaves for me. There we go. And this guy, we will approve. Now you're going to see one thing different when this guy runs. At least we should see one thing different. Oh, he's waiting. Come on. There we go. You notice on this one, I put the set param from RE tool into play, and he's running a very specific routine. Keep dialog notes. In fact, if you remember the return variables thing we did earlier, this is really what this is doing. It's running that JDF out underscore keep dialog notes right there. And that tells it, even though it's technically a different file, I still want to maintain the notes or on the original. And if we view it, notes are still there. So this is not a routine that you can run with ES Connect. And it really gets back to the fact that you cannot pass these variables back in this way. Now, I know there's been a request made to Dalim to be able to incorporate the same kind of thing in ES Connect. Whether they will actually implement that is another question. I'm really not sure. But in ETWiST, as you can see, JDF out, keep dialog notes. Oh, and you have to set it to true. Yeah. And your previously marked up notes will be in play. Now we just hit the 1 hour mark, so I probably should stop now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Any questions? I don't
You
even look.
covered a couple I see, except for question about the future of ETWiST. Dalim mentioned, I think it was at last duo. They are working on incorporating both of them into one product inside of ES. That's easily a couple years away. So
Yeah.
we won't see that anytime soon. They're still trying to get ES6 out to us. So it's not an ES6, definitely. Don't even know if it'll be in the next full version. But that is their goal, to make them basically one product, incorporating the best points of both. We definitely wanted to make that clear to them. So, the main reason most, customers still need to run standalone Twist, and Mike, I don't know if you disagree with this, but actually is being able to run just separate workflows, things that pick up files, process, so nothing to do with ES.
Well, if I hadn't run long, I actually have an example of how to do that with ETWiST that I put in here.
There's definitely ways to do it with ETWiST, but I think that's the main reason is kind of these old workflows that do just a bunch of different things for you that really have nothing to do with jobs or anything specifically. It's just file conversions or different routines.
Yeah, I won't actually run through this, but this is a Samba mount to my ETWiST server, and these are 3 folders. sitting on my file system. Each folder has a different workflow associated with it. That's the way you set up ES file system. So all I have to do is drop files in there, and they serve as hot folders because each one of those feeds a different ETWiST workflow. And I also have it set up so that when it's done, it'll flush the files out of the hot folder. So really, it works pretty much like a normal Twist server. Dump it in, process it, flush it out of the folder, and then forward the files to wherever it is you want to forward them.
Yeah, I really thought of it that way. I always do the files not registered thing.
Yeah, this way you don't have anything left over. It grabs them, processes them according to whatever the rules are in your ETWiST workflow, and then it kicks them out at the end.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think that's all we have. So thanks.
Okay.
That was really good. That was definitely worth doing.
Well, third Wednesday of every month. So that means August the something or other for our next one. And frankly, I'm not sure what the topic is, but if people have topics they want to hear, let us know. I mean, this one was pretty much put together specifically because a customer asked. You asked.
The customer actually saw the first part of this where you mentioned you'd probably do a second part, right?
Yeah, he busted me. That's how it goes.
Yeah, call that. All right. Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks to everybody for attending. Y'all have a great rest of the week and stay healthy.
Thanks, everyone.